Last time, in the narrative of his interaction with man, God gave a brief record of the first 10 generations of Seth's line. Then we read his account of how he, the Creator, now disgusted and broken-hearted at man's evil disregard for him, decides he'll destroy the degenerate human race. The one exception, Noah and his family, because of his faith, were to be saved and animal species preserved. And so the boat was built, and they entered by the one door and were securely shut in by God. And then the unimaginable destruction came, a catastrophic global flood. And every human and much of the animal life outside was destroyed, and only the living contents of the boat were saved. God didn't forget the boat floating along with its precious cargo. This is in Genesis 8, verses 1 to 4. It says that God remembered Noah and, of course, all that were in the boat. He had them in mind. He had his eye on them. His rescue of Noah and the family from the global destruction was his plan from first to last. And he made sure it was completed. He caused or sent a wind to blow until the waters receded and mountaintops appeared like islands. And 5 months from the time the flood began, the boat came aground on the mountains of Ararat in modern-day Turkey. These events, which can be so easily taken for granted, are, or should be to us, amazing examples of God's control over every part of his creation. The record reflects this. It's stated simply, without fanfare or elaborate defenses. It's his story, and he gives us the choice whether we believe it and then make appropriate efforts to understand how the physical, in other words, the geological, the chemical, the socio-historical record confirms it, or to start with human presupposition and then contort or even reject as unscientific myths his account of how all these things took place. In light of that, it's worth considering the confusion and deception that God's enemy specializes in, and his ability to use the most sophisticated packaging in doing that. As can be imagined, it took some time from their grounding on the mountaintop until the water had receded enough for them to leave the boat and begin their new lives. And that's described in Genesis chapter 8, verses 5 to 14. Finally, God gave the word, and they climbed out and released the animals. This continues in Genesis 8, 15 to 19. We can only speculate about the range of emotions they experienced as the only humans left on the planet. One thing we do know is that they gratefully acknowledged that it was God who had rescued them. In fact, the first thing the narrative records in Genesis 8, verse 20, is Noah building an altar, a platform of stones, and killing specific animals and birds and then burning them there. Think about it. These animals had been in the boat with Noah and his family for just over a year. Now, the innocent animals that had shared the safe haven of the boat have lost their lives. God took no pleasure, he later tells us, in the innocent deaths of creatures that he'd created. But he was willing to pay that price, and much, much more, it turns out, in pursuit of a relationship with his image bearers, even as degenerate as they now were, they now are. They had turned away as a race, chosen rebellion, evil, the side of the enemy, but he would respond in grace and love to even one who would approach by faith on his terms, with innocent animal blood shed and life taken to represent the lot that was rightly theirs. And that's what happens here. Let's read Genesis 8, 21 to 22. And the Lord was pleased with the aroma of the sacrifice and said to himself, I will never again curse the ground because of the human race, even though everything they think or imagine is bent toward evil from childhood. I will never again destroy all living things. As long as the earth remains, there will be planting and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. So God is pleased at the aroma coming from the sacrifice. In other words, all that it represents. And as Noah stands there, looking out from that mountain at the recently flooded landscape, God stretches a rainbow out in the sky and says that it symbolizes a firm promise he's making, that he will not destroy the earth in that way again. Here's a perfect example of something that can be defined only in materialistic terms if we choose. Sunlight being refracted from water particles in the air, usually after recent rain, or that can be first of all seen as part of God telling his story writ large in the sky, only then to be described in the lesser, subservient and limited story of physics and science. The narrative moves on from this point to describe the repopulating of the earth after the universal destruction of the flood. Noah's three sons, Ham, Shem and Japheth, are identified, this is in Genesis 9, 18 and 19, as the forebears or progenitors of the entire population of the earth from the flood to now. God records some early generations. This is in Genesis 10, and this gives many insights into the way nations developed. Again, the way we resolve any apparent conflicts between God's account, recorded here as the book of beginnings, that is Genesis, and on the other side, the positivist claims of ethno-history, will depend on our preconceptions, our faith-level commitments about who the primary storyteller really is. Now the account moves forward to a time more than 3 generations after the Great Flood, a civilization that had settled in a plain of Babylonia, a part of the Middle East, which would later be called Mesopotamia. And the picture is not a pretty one from God's perspective. Remember that the great-grandparents of these people have been eyewitnesses of the global destruction and had been in the boat God had used to preserve them and the animals. But already they had moved far away from an appropriate appreciation of him as creator. They had given up coming to him in the way he had graciously given to humans after the fall, in faith, with the sacrifice of animals. They were telling their own stories. In fact, a concerted effort was made to have their story as a people, a civilization, told in the form of a great tower or ziggurat for all to see. This is in Genesis 11, verse 4. It was to reach to the sky, a monument to them, a means of physical protection and a way of preserving their reputation for history. It's not difficult to see the hand of the enemy in all of this. It reeks of his arrogant ambition to supplant God's rightful place. It's ironic then that the name of the tower, Babel, is associated not with great success and unity, but with failure and dispersion. Because God, knowing their arrogant intentions, is unwilling to let them gather their strength and resources together in a concerted denial of their need for him, their creator. You can read the account in Genesis 11, 5-9. Over the centuries and millennia since, many other civilizations and countless individuals have literally or metaphorically shaken their fist in defiance at God. Sometimes the results are immediate. More often, God graciously gives them opportunity to see their foolishness. But in every case, the results have been and always will be the same. He will not let anyone else take over his role as the writer, the author and teller of his story. Fascinatingly, God does something to this post-flood civilization that makes it impossible for them to tell their story to each other as a homogeneous group. In tangible terms, it made cooperation on their audacious project impossible. He targeted something that he had gifted man with in the first place, but which was now taken for granted: speech, the ability to communicate tangible facts as well as ideas and abstract concepts. His narrative simply says that he confused their languages, and this had the effect of scattering them over the world, over the globe. This, of course, has enormous implications for the ethno-history of the world, as extended family groups expanded and gradually moved out from the Mesopotamian plains, heading south into Africa and east into Asia and beyond. Also, it should be noted, it forced the fulfillment of God's original intention for man, which was to populate the earth.